The polished gavel in Judge Harlan Whitaker's hand felt as heavy as a death sentence. He stared down from his elevated bench, a monarch in his own kingdom of law, at the terrified black woman in the defendant's box. Tasha Jenkins, a single mother caught with enough fentanyl to kill a city block. To him, she was just another statistic, another piece of refuse to be swept from his pristine streets. He was ready to make an example of her, to deliver a speech that would be quoted in the papers. But he had no idea the woman he was about to crush was a phantom, a carefully crafted lie. And the FBI agents, listening to his every word, were about to turn his courtroom into a cage of his own making. The rust on the rear fender of the Toyota Camry was a work of art. Not real rust, but a masterful blend of oxidizing paint and chemical agents applied by the FBI's Technical Services Division. To any passing cop, it screamed neglect, low income, and most importantly, easy target. Special Agent Kendra, K. Reeves, currently living under the alias Tasha Jenkins, hated it. She was used to the sleek anonymous sedans of government service, not a car that wheezed when it started. For months, Tasha had been a ghost. Her meticulously fabricated identity showed she worked part-time as a cleaner for a commercial firm, lived in a run-down apartment complex in the city's poorest district, and was fighting for custody of a non-existent young son from an equally non-existent deadbeat ex. She was the perfect prey, designed to test the integrity of a system that federal intelligence suggested was deeply compromised. The initial target of Operation Clean Slate was a mid-level drug kingpin named Dominic Rossi, but every attempt to build a case against him hit a brick wall. Witnesses recanted, evidence vanished from lockup, and search warrants were mysteriously denied by one specific court, the district court presided over by the Honorable Judge Harlan Whitaker. The whispers in the U.S. Attorney's office were that Whitaker was more than just a tough-on-crime judge. He was a gatekeeper. The operations focus shifted. They needed to see how the system itself worked, from the street to the bench. So, they created Tasha. The moment came on a Tuesday night. Kay was driving home from her job, obeying every traffic law with painstaking precision. A police cruiser, a Crown Victoria with a slight but noticeable front-end shimmy, fell in behind her. It followed her for blocks. It was a classic intimidation tactic. They were waiting for a rolling stop, a busted taillight, any excuse. Kay gave them none. Finally, the blue and red lights flashed. Kay pulled over, her heart rate steady, a testament to years of training at Quantico. This was the test. Her hands went to 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. The interior of the Camry was bathed in flashing lights. 2 officers approached, one on each side. The one at her window was a thick-necked man with a bristly mustache and a name tag that read, Harlan. His partner, Vance, lingered by the passenger side, his hand resting on his sidearm. "License and registration, ma'am," Harlan said, his voice flat and bored. Kay complied, her hands moving slowly. As Tasha, she had to be nervous, not the cool-headed federal agent she was. She let her hand tremble slightly as she handed over the documents. Harlan took them, his eyes barely glancing at her face. He was looking past her into the car. "Ma'am, do you know why I pulled you over?" "No, officer. I was going the speed limit." "Your right tail light is out." He lied. The tech team had checked every bulb on the car not long ago. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'll get it fixed first thing in the morning at Henderson's Auto Repair." She added the local detail to make her story more grounded. "We'll see," Harlan grunted. He took her papers back to his cruiser. This was the critical moment. Vance, the other officer, stayed by her passenger window, his flashlight beam dancing over the empty seat, the glove box, the floor mats. He was the plant man. Kay kept her eyes forward, breathing evenly. She couldn't react. She couldn't even look in the mirror to watch. The entire car was wired for audio and video, but that wouldn't help Tasha Jenkins in court. After an eternity that was probably a few minutes, Harlan returned. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the vehicle." "Why? What's going on?" Kay pitched her voice higher, injecting a note of panic. "Just step out of the car, please," he said, his voice hardening. She did as she was told. As soon as she was on the curb, Vance opened the passenger door and began a cursory search. It didn't take long. "Well, well, Harlan, what do we have here?" Vance called out. He pulled a heavy brick-shaped package wrapped in black duct tape from under the passenger seat. Kay's blood ran cold, even though she knew it was coming. "The bait?" "That's not mine," she cried, a genuine shock in her voice that she didn't have to fake. It was one thing to plan for it, another to see it. "I have never seen that before in my life." Harlan pushed her roughly against the side of the Camry. "You have the right to remain silent." He began the words, a familiar, sickening litany. As the cold steel of the handcuffs clamped around her wrists, Kay Reeves vanished completely. She was now Tasha Jenkins, an innocent woman caught in a nightmare, and the nightmare was just beginning. The holding cell at the precinct was a study in institutional misery. The concrete bench was cold, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and despair, and the only sound was the distant echoing clang of a steel door. For hours, Tasha Jenkins sat there. She was denied her phone call for the first part, a classic tactic to disorient and break down a suspect. When she finally got it, she called the number for her designated public defender, a man whose name she'd been given only as part of her deep cover identity. His name was Marcus Hale. He arrived looking exactly as she'd pictured, overworked, underpaid, with a rumpled suit and a stack of files that seemed permanently attached to his arm. His eyes held a deep, weary empathy. He'd seen 1,000 Tasha Jenkinses. "Miss Jenkins," he said, sitting down opposite her in a small, sterile interview room. "I'm Marcus Hale. I've looked at the arresting officer's report. It's not good." "It's not mine," Kay said, her voice hoarse. "I swear to God, I've never seen those drugs before." "They planted it." Hale sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. He believed her. He almost always believed his clients, but it rarely mattered. "I understand, and we will argue that. But the charge is possession with intent to distribute kilograms of fentanyl. The DA is not going to play games with this. Bail is going to be astronomical." He was right. The arraignment was a blur. Kay, now in a baggy orange jumpsuit, was led into a courtroom that felt cavernous and intimidating. At the head of it, on a bench that looked more like a throne, sat Judge Harlan Whitaker. He was a man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a perpetually tanned forehead. His face was a mask of stern authority, his eyes small and sharp. He scanned the charges read by the clerk, his lip curling in a faint sneer as he looked at Kay. He didn't see a person. He saw a docket number, a problem to be disposed of. The prosecutor, a young, ambitious assistant district attorney named Ryan Caldwell, recommended bail be set at $1 million. Hale shot to his feet. "Your Honor, my client is a single mother with no prior offenses. She works a part-time job, has deep ties to the community, and poses zero flight risk. $1 million is not bail. It's pre-trial detention. We request she be released on her own recognizance." Judge Whitaker didn't even look at Hale. His gaze was fixed on Kay, cold and appraising. Mr. Hale, your client was allegedly found with enough narcotics to poison a small city. The people of this community have a right to be protected from predators. I, for one, will not allow this courthouse to be a revolving door for dealers of death." His voice was a deep, resonant baritone, the kind that was perfect for pronouncements of guilt. Every word dripped with self-righteous condemnation. "She is presumed innocent, Your Honor," Hale pleaded. "A presumption she will have every opportunity to defend at trial," Whitaker said dismissively. "Bail is set at $750,000. Cash only." He banged his gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Next case. Kay's handler, Special Agent in Charge Aaron Lee, had been clear. Under no circumstances was she to be bailed out. The point of the operation was to experience the system exactly as a real indigent defendant would. So, Kay was sent to the county jail to await trial. The weeks that followed were a descent into hell. The jail was overcrowded, violent, and dehumanizing. Kay used every bit of her training to navigate the complex social hierarchies, to stay invisible, to survive. She spoke to Hale every few days. He was working tirelessly, filing motions to suppress the evidence based on an illegal stop, and to get the dashcam footage from Harlan and Vance's cruiser. Every motion was denied. Judge Whitaker swatted them away without a second thought. The motion to suppress was denied on the grounds the officer had reasonable suspicion due to the fictional busted tail light. The request for dash cam footage was met with a report from the police department stating the camera had unfortunately malfunctioned during the shift in question. It was a perfect, seamless frame-up, protected from the top down. Hale was starting to lose hope. "I've never seen anything like it, Tasha," he confessed during one visit, his face pale. "It's like he has a personal vendetta. Every ruling, every motion, it's all gone against us before we even argue it. He's pushing the trial date up, too. He's giving us no time to prepare." "He just wants to get me in a cage," Kay said, playing her part. "It feels that way," Hale admitted, his voice low. "It really does." Kay knew it was more than a feeling. From the bugs her team had planted weeks ago in the courthouse, they knew Whitaker had a connection to Dominic Rossi. They had recordings of coded phone calls, but they didn't have the smoking gun yet. They needed Whitaker to overplay his hand, to become so confident in his untouchable power that he would make a fatal mistake. And as she sat in her cell, wearing the same orange jumpsuit as the genuinely innocent and the hopelessly guilty, Kay knew that she was the bait in a much larger trap. The system wasn't just failing, it was being actively wielded as a weapon, and she was standing right at the point of impact. The trial of the state versus Tasha Jenkins began on a sweltering Monday in August. The courtroom's air conditioning was fighting a losing battle, making the tense atmosphere even more suffocating. Kay, now dressed in a simple blouse and slacks provided by Hale's office, sat at the defense table. She looked small and defeated, a role she had perfected over weeks of mental conditioning. Judge Whitaker presided with an air of grim satisfaction. From the moment he entered, he controlled the room not with judicial temperament, but with quiet, absolute tyranny. The jury selection was a farce. Every potential juror who expressed even a hint of skepticism towards police testimony was dismissed by Whitaker for cause, often before the prosecutor even had to use a peremptory challenge. Hale's objections were noted for the record with a dismissive wave of the judge's hand. The resulting jury was a collection of 12 stern-faced citizens who looked like they'd convicted Kay in their minds before the first witness was even called. The prosecution, led by A.D.A. Caldwell, presented a simple, brutal case. Officer Harlan took the stand first. He was a model of calm professionalism, his uniform crisp, his testimony rehearsed to perfection. He recounted the traffic stop, the busted tail light, and the nervous energy he sensed from the defendant. "She kept looking at the passenger seat," Harlan said, his gaze steady. "It was clear to me she was trying to hide something." "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation," Hale called out. "Overruled," Whitaker said instantly. "The officer is testifying to his observations and professional experience. Continue, officer." Hale slumped back in his seat, defeated. Next came Officer Vance, who described finding the package. He held up the evidence bag containing the brick of fentanyl for the jury to see. It was a tangible object, a solid block of guilt. He described how it was tucked deep under the seat, a place it could only have been put by someone inside the car. When it was Hale's turn to cross-examine, he did his best to poke holes in the story. "Officer Harlan," Hale began, "my client's vehicle was inspected just a week prior to this incident, and the taillight was fully functional. Can you explain that?" "I can't speak to what happened a week ago, Counselor. I can only speak to what I saw that night. The light was out." "And your dash cam, which would have shown the malfunctioning light, was broken, correct?" "We'd filed a report on it earlier that day. Unfortunate timing." It was a fortress of lies, each one reinforcing the other. Hale tried to question Vance about the discovery of the drugs. "So you, a right-handed officer, reached across the entire vehicle with your left hand to feel under the passenger seat from the driver's side?" Hale asked, trying to demonstrate the awkwardness of the alleged discovery. "I used my flashlight to look first, saw the corner of the package, and then retrieved it," Vance said smoothly. He'd been coached well. The air cam footage from the FBI drone that had been tracking the police cruiser told a different story. It showed Vance lingering by the passenger door for nearly a minute while Harlan ran the license, opening the door just a crack, enough time to slide a package under the seat from the outside. But that footage was inadmissible for now. It was evidence in a federal investigation, not for the defense of Tasha Jenkins. The most difficult part for Kay was her own testimony. She had to take the stand to deny the charges, to subject herself to Whitaker's scorn and Caldwell's cross-examination. She kept her story simple and truthful up to a point. "I was driving home from my cleaning job. They pulled me over, said my taillight was out. Then they pulled that thing out of my car. I've never seen it before in my life. I don't do drugs. I would never have that in my car." Ada Caldwell circled her like a shark. "Ms. Jenkins, you're a single mother, correct? You work a part-time minimum wage job. It's hard to make ends meet, isn't it?" "I manage. Kilograms of fentanyl have a street value of over $200,000, Miss Jenkins. That's a lot of money, money that could solve a lot of problems for someone in your position. Wouldn't you agree?" "Objection," Hale said, rising. "Counsel is insinuating a motive without any factual basis." "Sustained," Whitaker said surprisingly, but then he added, looking at the jury, "The jury will disregard the question, though they are free to apply their own common sense to the defendant's circumstances." It was a devastating blow, a judicial instruction to profile. Kay could feel the jurors' eyes on her, their faces hardening. Her poverty had been turned into evidence of her guilt. Throughout the multi-day trial, Whitaker was the prosecution's silent partner. He smiled subtly at their successful points, sighed with theatrical impatience during Hale's cross-examinations, and ruled against the defense on nearly every single objection. He was not a judge. He was a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of injustice, and he was nearing the grand finale. Kay watched him, her own anger a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She saw the flickers of contempt in his eyes, the smug certainty. He wasn't just railroading her, he was enjoying it. He believed he was cleansing his city of filth, and he had appointed himself the righteous hand of that purification. This deep personal venom was exactly what S.A.C. Lee had been hoping for. Whitaker wasn't just corrupt, he was arrogant, and arrogance was the crack in the fortress that the FBI was about to blow wide open. The closing arguments were a formality. A D.A. Caldwell painted Tasha Jenkins as a predator, a dealer of poison who cynically used the guise of a struggling mother to traffic deadly narcotics. He held up the brick of fentanyl again. This is not the property of an innocent woman. This is the tool of a merchant of death. Don't let her fool you. Marcus Hale, to his credit, gave the argument of his life. He spoke with a raw passion that came from a place of genuine outrage. He pointed out the inconsistencies, the convenient malfunction of the dash cam, the lack of any fingerprints belonging to his client on the drug packaging, the absence of any other paraphernalia in her car or home. The state's case rests on two things, he boomed, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. The word of two police officers and a package of drugs that could have been put there by anyone. They have presented you with a story, but they haven't presented you with the truth. They are asking you to ruin a woman's life based on a foundation of doubt and prejudice. Do not let them. Kay watched the jury. A few of them looked uncomfortable, but most stared back with impassive, hard faces. They had already made up their minds. Judge Whitaker gave his instructions to the jury. He read them in a monotone, but his emphasis was subtle and masterful. He stressed the credibility of police officers, the legal definition of possession, and downplayed the concept of reasonable doubt, framing it as an almost impossible standard to meet. Then the jury filed out. Kay sat beside Hale, her hands clasped in her lap. The waiting was a unique form of torture. For her, it was a countdown. For Hale, it was a vigil. "We did all we could," he whispered, not looking at her. He looked utterly broken. He had poured his heart into this defense, and he knew it was for nothing. "Thank you, Mr. Hale, for everything," Kay said, and for the first time, a hint of the real agent, the woman of strength and conviction, bled through. "You fought for me. I won't forget that." He gave her a sad, confused smile. They didn't have to wait long. It was just long enough to have given the appearance of deliberation. The jury filed back in, their faces grim. None of them would look at her. It was the classic sign. The court clerk took the verdict slip from the foreman. In the matter of the state versus Tasha Jenkins, on the charge of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, we, the jury, find the defendant. The clerk paused, clearing his throat. The silence was absolute. "Guilty." A collective gasp went through the small public gallery. Hale dropped his head into his hands. Kay remained perfectly still, her face a mask of schooled resignation. Inside, however, a cold, precise fury was building. She looked at Whitaker. The judge had a flicker of a smile on his lips, a victor's smile. It was triumphant, smug, and utterly devoid of compassion. He had done it. He had removed another undesirable from his perfect city. He looked down at Kay with an expression of profound disgust, as if he couldn't wait to be rid of her. "Miss Jenkins, please rise," Whitaker commanded. Kay stood, her legs steady. Given the overwhelming evidence and the jury's swift, decisive verdict, Whitaker began, his voice ringing with authority, "This court sees no reason to delay sentencing. We will reconvene in 1 hour for the sentencing phase. I suggest, Mr. Hale, you use that time to prepare your client for a very long stay with the Department of Corrections." He banged his gavel, a sharp, final crack. "Court is in recess." As the bailiffs moved to escort her out, Kay locked eyes with Whitaker one last time. She let him see a flash of something in her gaze. Not fear, not despair, but something hard and unbreakable. It was a look of utter contempt. It was a mistake, a break in character, but she couldn't help it. For a split second, a flicker of confusion crossed the judge's face. He had expected tears. He had expected pleading. He had not expected defiance, but then he dismissed it, his arrogance reasserting itself. She was nothing, a convicted felon. In an hour, he would have the pleasure of sending her to prison for the next 30 years, maybe more. He had absolutely no idea that his hour was already up. An hour later, the courtroom reassembled. The air was thick with finality. Kay stood beside a pale Marcus Hale at the defense table. A D.A. Caldwell sat at his, looking proud and confident. Judge Harlan Whitaker took his seat on the bench, shuffling some papers, before looking down at Kay with theatrical gravity. This was his favorite part, the sermon from the Mount. "Tasha Jenkins," he began, his voice resonating with practiced solemnity. "You stand before this court a convicted felon. You are a poison in the veins of this community, a purveyor of misery and death, masquerading as a struggling mother to garner sympathy. But this court is not sympathetic. This court is an instrument of justice, an instrument of consequence." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "People like you are a blight. You prey on the weak and erode the very fabric of our society. Therefore, it is the duty of this court to remove you from it, to protect the decent, hard-working citizens who abide by the law." Kay watched him, her expression unreadable. Her heart was beating a steady, rhythmic tattoo against her ribs. Any second now. For the crime of possession of a controlled substance, fentanyl, with intent to distribute, this court sentences you to the maximum allowable term under state guidelines, Whitaker declared, his voice rising to a crescendo. That is a term of 30 years in a state penitentiary, without the possibility of parole. He picked up his gavel to make it final. He savored the moment, the absolute power he held over this woman's life. And then it happened. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a deafening bang. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway were 4 people who did not belong. 2 were broad-shouldered men in dark suits, with FBI emblazoned in yellow letters on their tactical vests. Flanking them was Kay's handler, Special Agent in Charge Aaron Lee. But leading them all, walking down the center aisle with a purposeful, unhurried stride, was a woman with sharp eyes and an iron-gray bun, Miriam Goldstein, the United States Attorney for the Southern District. "What is the meaning of this?" Whitaker boomed, his face turning a shade of purple. "This is a court of law. I will have you all held in contempt." Goldstein didn't stop walking until she reached the prosecutor's table. She placed a thick leather portfolio on it with a solid thud. Ada Caldwell looked up at her, his face a mixture of confusion and fear. "Judge Whitaker," U.S. Attorney Goldstein said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of immense authority. "My name is Miriam Goldstein. This proceeding is over." "It most certainly is not," Whitaker sputtered, banging his gavel uselessly. "Bailiffs, remove these people." The 2 court bailiffs took a hesitant step forward, but stopped dead when the 2 FBI agents turned to face them, flipping open their badges. Lee stepped forward. "Everyone stay where you are." His voice was quiet, but commanded immediate obedience. Goldstein turned her attention to the bench. "Arthur Whitaker, no, Harlan Whitaker. The woman you have just sentenced is Special Agent Kendra Reeves of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Marcus Hale's jaw dropped. He stared at Kay, who now stood straight, her defeated posture gone, replaced by the rigid bearing of a federal agent. She looked back at him and gave a slight, apologetic nod. Whitaker's face went from purple to white. He gripped the edge of his bench, his knuckles turning as pale as his face. This is an absurd lie. A trick. She is a convicted drug dealer. No, she is not, Goldstein said, her voice like ice. She is a decorated federal agent who has, for the last several months, been acting in an undercover capacity as part of a federal investigation into systemic corruption in this very courthouse. An investigation that ends today with you. She turned to Lee. Agent Lee, would you do the honors? Aaron Lee walked past the defense table and stopped in front of Kay. He pulled a small key from his pocket. Good work, Kay, he murmured as he unlocked her handcuffs. Kay rubbed her wrists, the feeling of freedom surreal. She turned and faced the judge, who, just moments before, had condemned her to a lifetime in prison. By the authority granted to me by the Department of Justice, you are under arrest. The two FBI agents walked calmly past the bar, up the steps to the bench. Whitaker stared at them, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The illusion of his power had shattered completely. He was no longer a king on a throne. He was just a scared, guilty old man in a black robe. On what charge? He whispered, his voice a hoarse croak. Let's start with a few, Goldstein said, ticking them off on her fingers. Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO violations, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, obstruction of justice, and my personal favorite, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. You used your sacred position to frame an innocent woman to protect your criminal associate, Dominic Rossi, and you did it all from that bench. As the agents reached him, one pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The sound of the steel ratcheting shut around Judge Whitaker's wrists, in his own courtroom, echoed louder than any gavel he had ever struck. His reign was over. The courtroom, once a theater of fabricated guilt, transformed into a federal crime scene. While Judge Whitaker was escorted out a side door, trembling and ashen-faced, Miriam Goldstein addressed the stunned occupants. Nobody leaves, she commanded. This courtroom is now sealed. Kay, no longer Tasha, stood beside Lee, the relief of dropping her cover mingling with the cold satisfaction of the operation's success. Marcus Hale was staring at her, his mind struggling to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. You're FBI, he stammered. Special Agent Kendra Reeves, she confirmed, offering her hand. Mr. Hale, you're an exceptional lawyer. You fought for a client you believed in against a system that was rigged from the start. On behalf of the Justice Department, thank you. Hale shook her hand numbly, his eyes wide. The dash cam, the taillight, it was all a lie. Every last word of it, Lee confirmed, and we have the proof. Goldstein directed one of her agents to bring ADA Caldwell to her. The young prosecutor was sweating profusely, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Mr. Caldwell, Goldstein began, her tone dangerously low. You have a choice to make right here, right now. You can either be a witness for the United States government, or you can be a co-defendant alongside that disgraced judge. We have recordings of your phone calls with Whitaker discussing how you would handle the Jenkins case. We know he pressured you to seek the maximum sentence. Did you know the evidence was fabricated? Caldwell swallowed hard. No, I swear I had no idea. He just told me the case was airtight and to push for a heavy sentence to make a statement. A statement? Goldstein repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. Very well. You'll have plenty of time to make a statement of your own, under oath, to a federal grand jury. Meanwhile, another FBI team was moving on Officers Harlan and Vance, who were in the courthouse cafeteria celebrating their successful testimony. They were arrested mid-sip of coffee, their smug expressions turning to panic as they were cuffed and read their rights in front of their bewildered colleagues. The true scope of Operation Clean Slate was now revealed. Goldstein explained to the assembled court staff, the shell-shocked jury, and the bewildered public defenders that the investigation had started with Dominic Rossi's drug ring. For years, Rossi has operated with impunity, she explained. We suspected he had a man on the inside, a powerful ally who could make evidence disappear, quash warrants, and ensure any of his soldiers who got arrested received laughably light sentences or had their cases dismissed on technicalities. That man was Judge Harlan Whitaker. She revealed that Whitaker was receiving substantial monthly payments laundered through a real estate company from Rossi. In return, he was Rossi's get-out-of-jail-free card, but they needed to prove it in an undeniable way. We couldn't risk a real person's life in this system, Lee elaborated, gesturing toward Kay. So we created a target. Special Agent Reeves as Tasha Jenkins was designed to be the perfect victim for Whitaker's particular brand of corrupt justice, a poor minority woman with a public defender accused of a drug crime. He saw her as disposable. He assumed no one would look twice. He assumed wrong. He explained the frame-up. Harlan and Vance were two of Whitaker's pet cops. Whenever the judge needed a problem to go away or a charge to stick, he'd pass the word to them. They were the ones who planted the drugs in Kay's car on Rossi's orders, conveyed through Whitaker. Rossi wanted to test the system's loyalty, and Whitaker was eager to prove his worth. The feds had it all: encrypted texts between Rossi and a burner phone used by Whitaker, financial records tracking the illicit payments, high-resolution satellite and drone imagery of the traffic stop clearly showing Vance planting the package, and hours of audio from bugs planted in Whitaker's chambers, where he boasted about how he was going to put the fear of God into the defendant and make an example of her for the rest of them. As this was being explained, a third FBI team, armed with a no-knock warrant signed by a federal magistrate, was hitting Dominic Rossi's opulent suburban mansion. They found him trying to flush laptops and cell phones down the toilet. The linchpin of his entire criminal enterprise, his judicial protection, had been yanked away. His empire crumbled in a matter of minutes. Back in the courtroom, Kay watched the pieces fall into place. The jurors looked horrified, realizing they had been pawns in a corrupt judge's game. Marcus Hale was a mix of vindicated and appalled. The system he had dedicated his life to, flawed as he knew it was, had been actively and maliciously perverted. The case of the state versus Tasha Jenkins was expunged on the spot, but the new case, the United States of America versus Harlan Whitaker, Dominic Rossi, et al., was just beginning. It was a sprawling indictment that would rip the veil off the city's corruption and expose the rot that had festered for years, all hidden behind a black robe and the swing of a gavel. The downfall of a man like Harlan Whitaker was not a quiet affair. It was a detonation that sent shockwaves through the city's legal and political establishments. The media frenzy was instantaneous and relentless. The story was irresistible. The powerful, tough-on-crime judge revealed as a gangster's crony, brought down by an undercover black female FBI agent he had tried to frame. Whitaker's arrogance, his greatest weapon on the bench, became his biggest liability. Convinced of his own superiority, he refused any plea deal offered by the U.S. Attorney's Office. He hired a team of high-priced lawyers led by a notorious legal shark named Sterling Voss and prepared to fight. He would paint himself as the victim of an overzealous federal government, a patriot being persecuted for his conservative judicial principles. It was a disastrous strategy. The federal trial was held in a different jurisdiction before a no-nonsense judge who was immune to Whitaker's old boy network. Miriam Goldstein prosecuted the case herself. She was methodical, relentless, and brilliant. One by one, the pillars of Whitaker's defense were demolished. His finances were laid bare for the jury, with forensic accountants tracing a direct line from Rossi's criminal enterprises to Whitaker's offshore accounts. The sums were staggering, amounting to millions of dollars. Officers Harlan and Vance, facing decades in federal prison, turned on their former patron. They sang like canaries. On the stand, they described in detail the system Whitaker had created. They recounted dozens of instances where he had instructed them to tamper with evidence, intimidate witnesses, or, as in Kay's case, manufacture a crime from whole cloth. Their testimony was self-serving, but it was damning. Ada Ryan Caldwell also testified, shamefaced, about the pressure Whitaker had put on him, describing the judge's overtly racist language in chambers when referring to Kay's undercover persona. He called her a roach that needed to be exterminated, Caldwell mumbled, refusing to make eye contact with the defense table. The star witness, of course, was Special Agent Kendra Reeves. When she took the stand, she was no longer the frightened, vulnerable Tasha Jenkins. She was the embodiment of federal power and integrity. In a crisp business suit, she spoke with calm, unshakable authority. She recounted the traffic stop, the trial, and the sentencing. She detailed the psychological toll of living the role, of feeling the weight of a corrupted system designed to crush her. Voss, Whitaker's lawyer, tried to attack her credibility. "So you are in fact a professional liar, Agent Reeves. You lie for a living." Kay met his gaze without flinching. "I am a professional actor, Mr. Voss. I adopt roles to expose criminals who believe they are above the law, men like your client." The courtroom was silent. The most powerful evidence was the audio from the bug in Whitaker's chambers. The jury listened, wearing headphones, to the judge's own voice. They heard him mocking Marcus Hale's efforts, calling him a bleeding heart fool. They heard him using racial slurs to describe Tasha Jenkins, and they heard the crucial call with Dominic Rossi, made the night before sentencing. "Don't you worry, Dom." Whitaker's voice echoed in their ears, slick with confidence. "Your problem is about to get a 30-year sentence. For hours." The verdict was guilty on all for hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts: racketeering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and multiple violations of the deprivation of rights under color of law. At his sentencing, Harlan Whitaker was a changed man. The tan was gone, replaced by a pasty, unhealthy pallor. The expensive suit hung loosely on his shrunken frame. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading fear. He stood before the federal judge and begged for mercy, speaking of his long service to the community and his family. The judge was unmoved. "You took an oath to uphold the law, Mr. Whitaker. Instead, you twisted it into a weapon for personal gain and prejudice. You perverted the very symbol of justice you wore on your back. You did not just break the law, you betrayed it. You betrayed the public's trust, and you betrayed the Constitution you swore to defend." The sentence was swift and brutal. Life in prison, not in a comfortable minimum security club fed, but in a high-security federal penitentiary. The hammer of justice had fallen, and it had fallen hard. Months after the sentencing, Special Agent Kendra Reeves stood in a polished conference room at the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C. Clean slate. The operation had been a clean slate. The operation had been a resounding success. Dominic Rossi, deprived of his judicial shield, was convicted and sentenced to decades. The corruption probe that spun off from Whitaker's conviction had led to the indictment of a dozen police officers, 2 other city officials, and a state senator. The city's entire political landscape had been redrawn. Marcus Hale was there for the ceremony. After the news broke, his small public defender's office had been flooded with donations and job offers from prestigious law firms. He turned them all down. He stayed right where he was, fighting for the poor and the forgotten. But now, with a renewed sense of purpose and a national reputation for integrity, he and Kay had become unlikely friends, bonded by the fire of Whitaker's courtroom. After the applause died down and the handshakes were done, Kay found a quiet moment by a window overlooking the Capitol. Lee came and stood beside her. "A good day's work," he said. "A good several months' work," she corrected with a small smile. "But it doesn't feel entirely like a victory." Lee nodded, understanding. "They leave scars, the undercover roles, especially one like that." "I can't stop thinking," Kay said, her voice quiet, "about what would have happened if I really were Tasha Jenkins. If there were no FBI, no hidden cameras, no U.S. attorney waiting in the wings. She would be an inmate number, sitting in a concrete box, her life stolen from her by a man who hated her just for existing. Her son would be in the foster system, and the world would have just kept on turning, convinced that justice had been done." The thought chilled her more than any threat she had ever faced in the field. "But you weren't her," Lee said softly. "And because you did what you did, the real Tasha Jenkinses out there have a slightly better chance. A few more monsters are off the board. That's the job, Kay. We can't fix the world. We just fight the battles we can win." She nodded, taking a deep breath. He was right. She straightened her shoulders, the weight of the medal on her chest a tangible reminder of her oath. She hadn't fixed the world, but she had brought a hammer of justice down on a man who believed he was a god. She had given a voice to the voiceless and exposed the rot hiding behind a veneer of authority. The scars of being Tasha Jenkins would always be a part of her, a constant, sobering reminder of the stakes. And it was that memory, that chilling knowledge, that would fuel her for the next fight and the one after that. The work was not done. It was never done. A year after Harlan Whitaker's conviction, the echoes of his downfall still reverberated through the city. For Special Agent Kendra Reeves, the echoes were personal. She stood before a class of new agent trainees at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. The faces looking back at her were young, eager, and full of the same unwavering belief in right and wrong that she once had. On the large screen behind her was a photo of the Toyota Camry with the rusted fender. "This vehicle was my life for months," Kay began, her voice steady and clear. "It was my office, my shield, and my prison. The woman who drove it, Tasha Jenkins, never existed, but the danger she was in was very real. Your training here will teach you how to handle a weapon, how to conduct surveillance, how to build a case. But we are here today to talk about the one weapon no one can train you for, the system itself." She was no longer a field agent after the Whitaker case. S.A.C. Lee and the Bureau's leadership had seen her unique experience as an invaluable teaching tool. She had been promoted to a lead instructor for the undercover training program. Her mission now was to forge agents who understood that the greatest battles weren't always against criminals with guns, but sometimes against corruption with a gavel. She walked them through Operation Clean Slate, not as a heroic tale, but as a cautionary one. She detailed the psychological discipline required to be powerless, to absorb the contempt and condescension of men like Whitaker without breaking character. He never saw a person, she told the trainees, her gaze sweeping across the room. He saw a stereotype, a problem to be erased. And that was his critical error. He underestimated his target. He assumed poverty and race equated to insignificance. As an undercover agent, your greatest advantage is when your enemy discounts you. Let their prejudice be the rope they use to hang themselves. Later that evening, Kay sat in her office, the lights of the academy casting long shadows on the wall. Her phone buzzed. It was a video call from Marcus Hale. His face, now framed by a neat haircut and a well-fitting suit jacket, appeared on the screen. He was smiling. "You're looking at the newest board member of the State Innocence Project," he announced, a note of pride in his voice. "Marcus, that's incredible," Kay said, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "They couldn't have picked a better person." "It's all because of you, you know," he said. The Whitaker case threw a spotlight on wrongful convictions like nothing else. We've had a flood of support, and the new DA is actually working with us. We just got a man exonerated. He served years on a drug charge. The arresting officer was Harlan's former partner. Kay felt a profound sense of satisfaction, a warmth that the Medal of Valor couldn't provide. This was the true aftermath, not the awards or the promotions, but the real-world change. The monster was gone, and now the light was finally reaching the dark places he had created. "That's the best news I've heard all year," she said. "The echoes of justice, Kay," he said, using a phrase she'd once said to him. "They just keep ringing. How are you, really?" "I'm good, Marcus. Teaching, trying to make sure the next generation is ready for the Whitakers of the world." After they hung up, Kay stared out the window. The scars of being Tasha Jenkins were still there, but they no longer ached. They were a map, a reminder of the terrain she had navigated. She had walked through the fire of a corrupt system and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. Her duty was clearer than ever, to ensure that the agents she trained understood that their badges were not just symbols of authority, but shields for the defenseless. They were the last line of defense, not just against crime, but against the failure of justice itself. The work was endless. The fight was eternal. But as Marcus had reminded her, the echoes of one righteous victory could ring for years, bringing hope and change long after the battle was won. And for Kay, that was a legacy worth fighting for. The story of Special Agent Kendra Reeves and the corrupt Judge Whitaker is a chilling reminder that the greatest threats to justice often wear the robes of authority. It shows how one person's prejudice, amplified by power, can shatter innocent lives. But it is also a story of incredible courage and profound karma. A system built to protect a criminal was brought down by the very woman it tried to crush. The scales of justice were not just balanced. They were shattered and rebuilt on a foundation of truth. Whitaker's gavel, once a symbol of his tyranny, became the sound of his own cage door slamming shut. If this story of justice served resonates with you, and you believe in holding power accountable, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime-style dramas where the truth is more powerful than any lie. Comment below what part of Judge Whitaker's downfall was the most satisfying for